Welcome to today's segment, Josh. We're so glad that you're here with us. I know
Thanks.
your experience back in the early 2000s with electronic health records. You've got 2 decades of being a chief operations officer in a number of different companies, Future Health, ChiroTouch, and then you went to ChiroSite for digital x-ray. And I know you've personally spoken to thousands of chiropractors over the years. So in today's segment, we wanted to invite you in so we could talk about technology and how technology is being adopted in the chiropractic profession as we are in the year 2026. So what are you seeing out there with chiropractors and their adoption? What kinds of technologies are they adopting?
Yes, there are really three different categories of technologies that we see chiropractors adopting. There are the clinical applications, things like EHRs, as you mentioned, therapies such as the red laser therapies, and then the diagnostic technologies like digital X-ray.
What surprises you most about those technologies? What are you seeing for adoption rates?
So adoption, the thing that really surprises me, it seems like a large portion of the profession isn't actually taking X-rays as spine experts. It surprises me that you wouldn't take X-rays. I've got an experience where a brother-in-law of mine, just a chiropractic patient, went in to see a chiropractor here in town and was shocked that they didn't take X-rays at all. I've had other people tell me that when they get referred out for an X-ray to go somewhere else, they never end up going back to that chiropractor. So it's one thing to refer out, but I'm wondering why a chiropractor wouldn't see the need to use digital X-ray at all, whether they refer out or have it in-house. Why wouldn't they?
Well, we did a study. It was actually a survey on about 300 and some DCs, and this study was probably about 4 years ago. And what it showed at the time was that approximately 60% of the profession of chiropractors had digital x-ray. That number has increased now. But those who had plain film x-ray was less than 10%. They hadn't upgraded to digital. But the most surprising statistic, which is what you were talking about, is that it was just under 25% of the profession didn't even have an x-ray in their practice. And I think there's a number of different reasons behind that. You mentioned being a spine care expert. Why wouldn't a spine care expert have a digital x-ray system? Well, I think there's like 4 different categories why a DC might not adopt digital x-ray. One might be cost. They haven't been able to justify the cost of having that x-ray room ready to go. I think when some of the young doctors graduate from college, their budget is very limited, so they have the right intent. And I hear many of them say, yeah, I'm going to add x-ray once I get some more money because I have all this $250,000 of student debt. I'm now starting a practice from scratch. This practice is going to cost me 100 grand to get up and running, but I don't have, and I need money for capital to fund the daily operations until I build up my clientele and my patient base. And I'll add x-ray next year in 2 years. And then before you know it, 5 years has gone by and they haven't done it. And they figure, well, I've gotten by without it. I'm not going to add it.
Can you tell me, how do they get by without it? So how can you practice without taking X-ray?
So I think it's justified in their mind. They rationalize it by saying, well, I'll refer out to the hospital and I'll have them take it, or a diagnostic imaging center. Or quite frankly, they say that. And as you know, I've lectured all over the country, and when I have these discussions on campus at a number of schools, or when I talk to 1 year, 2 year, 3 year doctors in practice, they say, yeah, I refer out. But when I press them, they actually only refer out 2, 3 people in a month. And so it's only like 10% of their patients they're not referring
Yeah.
out.
And you and I both know that the challenge with referring out is you talk to any patient of chiropractic, when they get referred out, are they coming back?
So that's a great point. And I think what you're finding is the inconvenience factor comes in where the patient gets referred out, the doctor doesn't have the x-rays back. I heard over in North Carolina, there's one area where there's a shortage of radiologists, and the imaging center couldn't even schedule the x-rays for a week. So they referred out, takes a week to get the image, and then it was taking another week before the report would be sent. You're 2 weeks into the care, and at that point, the patient is frustrated. And as you said with the example of your brother-in-law, they don't come back or they bail. And they're wondering in the back of their mind, without insulting the DC, they're wondering in the back of their mind, well, how do they know what's going on? They can't even see the x-ray yet or go over it with me. It's an issue.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big reason chiropractors aren't taking as many x-rays. A lot of these younger ones, they didn't invest in it right away. They got into a habit because they often say how you practice the first 3 years of your clinical practice is often the way you stay the rest of your career. And because 3 years has gone by, they didn't put x-ray in, they got used to it, and they haven't been able to justify it. And quite frankly, I think they've just been lucky they haven't been sued for failure to diagnose in a lot of these cases. When you take a look at some of the malpractice companies out there, they have written stories and articles where the DC failed to diagnose, and the reason for failure to diagnose wasn't because they didn't have the brains, it's because they didn't take the imaging. So that's a
Because
challenge.
they didn't take it, not because they didn't. No.
They didn't know. It's because they didn't take it, and then they didn't have anything to analyze. What else are you seeing?
Yeah, the other thing that really surprises me is those segment of chiropractors that I'll call throughput chiropractors. Here, and went to see a new chiropractor, um, and they didn't go through the things that I'm used to. They didn't take me through a patient intake. They didn't take me through, they didn't take x-rays of my spine. They didn't do any of that like I'm normally used to with my chiropractor. And I'm wondering, what's your take on that type of care? It seems like they just bring folks in and just run a lot of people through, and like they're doing more volume, like they're these throughput chiropractors, rather than what I'm normally used to.
Yeah, so it's important that the diagnosis be accurate so that the patient, so you know why you're there. Now, you know why you're there because you had whatever it was, neck pain, headaches, back pain. You went in for a specific reason, and you're an educated chiropractic patient, but so many others out there who have never been to a chiropractor before, they have certain expectations. Or if they've been to one, let's say they had an x-ray taken 10 years ago. What I find interesting is all of my kids, I have 7 children, right? They're all in their 20s now. But I took x-rays on all of my kids when they were in their adolescent years, their teenage years. They've had multiple sets of x-rays because I want to know what the development of their spine is. So some of these crazy naysayers out there who want to talk about radiation are out of touch with the latest scientific research. The literature clearly shows there is no damage or risk for regular plain film imaging if you had a full spine set of x-rays in a year.
As a patient, I go in and I have my teeth imaged every year or two, right? Is there any more risk to me as a patient having an image taken of my spine?
There really isn't. As a matter of fact, have you ever heard of any human being get cancer from having one full spine set of x-rays?
I've never heard of a case.
Doesn't exist. So it's silly. And if people want to find out, we created a website called radevidence.org. There's over 600 research studies on radiology on that website, radevidence.org. And you can look at that, and there's about 24 studies dispelling the myth that radiation from plain film imaging is harmful. As a matter of fact, there was a study done by DePaul University that completely dispelled all that. So here's what's happening. You have doctors repeating old studies from the 1940s and 50s as though it's fact and realistic today. And it's not. And then other DCs, especially these young ones, they hear that repeated. And so they start repeating it and everybody hears it as though it's fact. It is completely false. completely false that taking plain film images is dangerous or harmful. Now, I'm not talking about cases on infants or pregnant women. I'm talking about standard radiology imaging of the spine. So, with that said, that leads me to a question. I'm curious, do you have concerns about radiation when you get an x-ray taken?
No, not at all. When a medical provider asks you to, or tells you need to take an x-ray, it's not a concern at all. I get images of my teeth every year or so. My wife gets a mammogram every year or so, and there's no concern at all. It's preventative. There's not even any pain.
Chiropractors have been bamboozled by a few academicians trying to say, well, you should only take an x-ray if certain red flags are present. And that was based on a very, very poor recommendation from something called Choose Wisely. That Choose Wisely had 5 studies in it, 3 of which had no chiropractic involvement. And on top of that, they were medical studies using medication where it showed there wasn't a lot of improvement after x-rays, but there was no chiropractic care involved in those studies, the majority of them. So it's a false narrative, and that was for MDs prescribing medication. As chiropractors, we're applying a physical force. We are spine care specialists that are working on spinal alignment. So the number of techniques you see out there, like Gonstead, CBP, all the upper-cervical techniques, they rely on spinal alignment to make their determination on what kind of adjustment they're going to give. So they have to take an x-ray on all of their patients. So it's simply, I'm just going to say it, it's asinine to say you should only take an x-ray for chiropractic care if radiculopathy or pain persists longer than 6 weeks. Simply asinine. There are so many other reasons to take an x-ray of the spine, and I'm not the only one saying this. There was actually a study published 2 years ago in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, and it was a survey on nearly 4,000 chiropractors nationwide, and almost 97% of those chiropractors agreed with what I just said. They agreed that you should be able to take x-rays beyond red flags. So the profession, which is the standard of care, if the majority of the profession is doing it, that is the standard of care. The standard of care is to take x-rays if clinically warranted by the experienced doctor for whatever reason they feel necessary. It doesn't have to be red flags. So all these young kids being brainwashed that you only take x-rays with red flags is simply asinine, and I think it's a risk to the patient, and I think it's a detriment to the patient.
So should I as a patient be concerned if I go into a new chiropractic office in a new town and they don't take images of my spine before an adjustment, or is it always necessary?
It's not always necessary. I'm not saying every spine has to have an x-ray, but the example I gave with my 7 kids taking x-rays on them, I wanted to know what the health status of their spine is. You brought it up yourself about preventative care. Well, if I discovered that my wife went to a chiropractor and found out that her reversed cervical curve, if she had that, was leading to significant degenerative changes when she was in her 30s, but the changes weren't there yet because it was early on, and that chiropractor didn't know anything about it, couldn't tell if she had a reverse curve, because you can't tell that from posture in all cases. And therefore, he never gave her special exercises on the neck to prevent that from developing. And then let's say 20 years later, she's got tons of degenerative changes, which is now impacting her range of motion. I'd be pissed off at that chiropractor. That's me.
So you're also not saying that every new patient should have an x-ray taken.
Definitely not. I'm not saying 100% of patients need an x-ray, but let's go over some examples. Someone who's pregnant, someone who comes in with non-spinal related problems, they might not necessarily need an x-ray. or let's say palpation and exam findings, range of motion, are all checking out normal or near normal, well, then spinal x-rays wouldn't be warranted. So the person's having a very mild condition. But the thing DCs need to be aware of is there are so many congenital anomalies that might impact how you do an adjustment, what force you want to give, that being aware of some of these defects on the spine may impact where you adjust or how you adjust. And obviously the technique that the chiropractor uses. Activator doctors, it might be less important for them. I'm not saying they shouldn't take x-rays. I'm just saying a Gonstead doctor compared to an activator doctor, there's a different level of force happening there. And their analysis for the diagnosis on how they adjust requires them to take an x-ray. And they shouldn't be limited to red flags in giving the best care possible.
How do you make the determination, or how did you, when you were practicing, decide when to take an x-ray?
So I looked at posture as a major indicator and the history of where are the symptoms located. Are the symptoms and my exam findings, does it look like it's coming from the spine? And what level of severity is it? And I didn't judge it on, oh, you had to have it for 6 weeks before I decide to take an x-ray. It's going to impact the care that I decide to deliver and where I'm going to adjust. Palpation doesn't always match up with alignment. It's not always that way. And we all know that the pelvis, for example, could impact compensatory spinal alignment up higher in the spine. So I didn't take full spine x-rays on my patients unless that was warranted. I usually took regional x-rays or 2 adjacent regions. And then depending on symptoms, that determined any special views like flexion extension or oblique views. So it was a case-by-case basis, but then as you develop more and more experience, my clinical experience on knowing and seeing hundreds of spinal listhesis cases show up on L5, even though that wasn't always the location of their pain. Well, I have to be careful now how I'm going to adjust them. I'm not going to adjust L5 necessarily. I might have to adjust the sacrum when I thought I might adjust L5.
You talked a little bit before about 4 different reasons why chiropractors might not adopt digital x-ray or diagnostic technology in general. One of them was cost. What were the others?
Well, this one is going to sound bad, but I've had doctors confide in me, and if a number are confiding in this, there has to be others out there too. But certain doctors who haven't utilized x-ray technology over several years, I'm not going to say they forgot, but they don't feel confident in their skill set to take the images because of technology, AI, and software technology. It calculates that for them, but they don't know that. They're still thinking back to their college days when they had to go look on a chart, do a measurement, and calculate the KVP, the mass. All that's gone. It's all done for them. And so it's so much easier today to take a quality x-ray. And on top of that, the positioning of the patient. Look, within an hour of study, it'll all come back to them. So their fear, and that's really what it is, it's a fear factor or a confidence level that will they be able to do it in a high quality manner. And I applaud them for wanting to be quality, so they think, well, I'll just refer out. But the reality is they can pick it right back up. They had all the proper training. 1 hour refresher will get them right back on track. And with the technology of digital x-ray, it's practically done for them. And if they're off just a bit, they can adjust the scale, on x-ray.
Using APR, yeah. We've got fear of not knowing how to do it anymore, or not remembering how the technique. We've got price. What's another?
Well, we talked a little bit about these red flags. Well, on top of the red flags, you have liability. I hear students say all the time, well, my instructor told me that I don't want to take on all this liability for taking the x-ray. And they're referring to doing the read, the liability of reading an x-ray and missing a diagnosis on an x-ray. And this also is solved with technology, with teleradiology, but at the same time, that's crazy talk because you're still liable for failure to order the x-ray. I'm hearing more and more lawsuits for failure to diagnose than I ever have before. And you know about teleradiology. What are you seeing a trend in how doctors are using a second opinion?
Well, we see with our own user base, I don't know if this is where you're going, but we see with our own user base that there's an upward trend with folks using teleradiology. And we're seeing mass adoption across our user base.
So you're seeing more and more doctors rely on a DAC bar, a
Correct.
radiologist,
Yes.
to do the reads for them,
Yes.
which makes the doctor feel comfortable and not have to worry about the liability or take the time to do the report. That's what
Yes.
you're saying.
Yes, well, and often in many cases, the doctor will do their own report as well, but they'll send it out for peace of mind to get a second opinion.
I agree with that. I recall back in my day, before teleradiology existed, I would send 1 or 2 x-rays a month up to the hospital radiologist if I suspected a potential tumor, I wanted a more specific, narrow diagnosis on the kind of tumor, or perhaps there was a fracture, a mild stress fracture, and I wanted second opinion to confirm, to know, should I send this person to an orthopedic surgeon? Do they need casting? What do we need to do there? So we might put a splint on it if it seemed very mild, and I just wanted confirmation. And I would get a turnaround in 24 hours because we would physically run the x-rays up there. In today's world, how are you handling the speed of that second opinion?
We actually see a wide variety of our users not just use it for things like tumors or things that they see that are concerning on imaging. We have a number of our users that use it on 100% of their x-rays.
What about doctors who just, I'll use the word cherry pick, where they select certain cases? How often do you see that out there?
I think we see that quite a bit as well. I would say there's a large portion that use it on 1 or 2, like you were talking about, for concerning issues like is that a tumor or not. But I would say the majority of folks use it on the vast majority of their cases.
Gotcha.
As many doing it on every case.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, the cost of that compared to what it used to be. Like, I believe when you get a second opinion, I remember doctors paying $30, $40 for that. What are they paying today?
Yeah, today it's just $14 a read.
Yeah, and so that's extremely affordable and a great liability coverage, in my opinion.
Okay, so to recap, we've got cost, concern about not knowing how to take x-rays properly,
The red flags.
the red flags.
Meaning
What's the
taking
last
it
one?
beyond that. And then the liability issue that we just kind of talked about for failure to diagnose or fear of not being able to have a quality x-ray report. And finally, the last thing when we talk about cost or implementation is I don't think doctors understand that with leasing systems out there, they can implement a full digital x-ray system for less than $800 a month and have their profit center established in their practice, which makes it convenient for patients. It allows immediate diagnosis or within 24 hours if you're going to get a second opinion with a DAC bar doing an overread. And you've got the liability covered that way. And then the biggest thing I think we've talked about today is patient confidence and trust that the doctor has an accurate diagnosis. Now, I know there's so many chiropractors out to think, are you telling me, Steve, that I'm not accurately diagnosing because I'm not taking x-rays? I'm not saying that. But there's certainly many cases you don't have the full picture because you can't see the spine. You didn't know they had an extra vertebrae. You didn't know spinal listhesis was there. You didn't know there was a compression fracture on this 60-year-old lady due to osteoporosis. You don't even know if they have osteoporosis because you didn't take the x-ray. I find it highly offensive that any chiropractor wouldn't be taking an x-ray on any human being over the age of 50 if you're going to be using manual force to adjust them. I think it's insane. I think it's risky for the patient. I think it's a disservice to the patient. And I think you're not being a spine care expert. I think you're being a spinal technician. And if you're insulted by that, I don't care.
I 100% agree. From my perspective, patients absolutely want to know that their doctor knows what their spine looks like.
I agree. And I know this might be controversial for some out there, but if you're concerned about cost to the patient, then give it to them for free if you're worried about the cost. It's digital x-ray. It doesn't cost you to take an extra x-ray. Do it. It's needed to prevent, just like the dentists want to prevent cavities and other problems, just like oncologists want to prevent cancer from advancing to stage 4. They want to take a look at the tissue. They want to look at the teeth. As a chiropractor, I want to look at the spine because if there's something I discover that could be preventative, then we should have an image. Does this mean we should be taking x-rays every year like dentists do on the teeth? No. Should it be every 5 years, every 10 years? I don't have the right answer for that, but I certainly believe every 5 to 10 years. I take x-rays on my spine every 5 to 10 years. I've probably had 15 sets of x-rays on my cervical spine and probably a dozen on my lower back. Why? Because I want to know what the status of my spine is, what my disc height is. Does it impact the nutrition that I'm taking? Others out there often say things like, well, you could still give exercises, you could still give nutritional advice without the x-ray. You could, but chiropractors aren't. Don't tell me you're giving all these great pieces of advice to every patient who comes in. It seems like you're giving that much advice, but the reality is you're not doing it on every patient. And to see is to know. Josh, this has been a great conversation, and it's good to hear from a non-doctor's perspective. So thanks
Dr.
for,
K.
you bet.